Hey there everyone, this is Sunanda and welcome to my channel. In today's class, we will study in detail the poem The Cold Within written by James Patrick Kinney. This is one of the poem for ICSE syllabus class 9. In my previous video, I have already discussed about the poet, the theme and the summary of the poem. Here we will do a detailed study regarding the poem, that is stanza-wise discussion. If you haven't seen my previous video, please go and check it out. So now let's begin. We will start with the stanza 1. The first stanza in the opening of a narration as recorded by the poet himself. The first line, 6 humans trapped by happenstance. What does this line mean? 6 humans trapped by happenstance? That means they were 6 individual people and not a group of people who were stuck together or trapped together by mere fate. So it was not by choice but by mere fate that these 6 individuals were stuck together and they were not happy about it. That is why the word trapped has been used. Whereas the word trapped signifies that they weren't really happy in the situation. So in the line, the word trapped plays a very significant role. It reveals that these 6 people were not happy about the fact that they were stuck together in a situation. Okay. And as from the summary we already know that these 6 people hated each other. Why? Because they were full with prejudices and discrimination in their mind. About what? About caste, creed, religion, ethnicity and color. So their mind was filled with prejudices and discrimination, and that is why they hated each other and they did not like being trapped together in a situation. Now why were they trapped? Why? What was the situation that forcefully brought these 6 men who hated so much themselves together? The second line, however, tells us about the weather. So now from this line we will get to know why they were stuck together. The second line tells us about the weather, which is bleak and bitter cold. So why they were stuck together we get to know here. That is because the weather was very bad. The weather was bleak and bitter cold. That means it was extremely cold weather. The weather was very bad. That is why these 6 men who were so much in hatred with each other, they got stuck together. Okay. In this line, the poet is trying to make his readers familiar with the setting of his narration. So here in the first stanza, the poet is making his reader familiar with the circumstances of the situation. Okay, the situation which we will get to know in more detail in future. In the future stanzas, we will get to know it in more detail. So about this background, he is making his readers familiar. Okay. And inform that each of the 6 men, he is also giving a very vital information in the very first stanza. That is, each of the 6 men possessed stick of wood. This is very important information. You will get to know about its importance in the coming stanzas. Okay. So from the very first stanza, what we get to know? We get to know about the 6 people who were trapped by happenstance. That is, they were forcefully trapped with each other because they hated each other and they disliked this situation. And why they were together? Because of the bad weather. Because the weather outside was bleak and bitter cold. That is why they were stuck together and they were not happy about it. And lastly, they all possessed stick of wood. Okay. So I hope you have understood stanza 1. Now let's move on to stanza 2. The second stanza is actually the second phase of the narration. Okay. It is a very important stanza. We will get to know about soon. It is in this stanza that we get to know about the first character of the story. So over here we will be introduced with the first character of the story. Story means the poem. The poem is actually revealing us a story about the 6 men, right? So that is why they are saying it's a story. So we will be introduced with the very first character. So let's see. As the first stanza has already made clear that the story took place in a bitter cold place. So obviously from the first stanza we have got to know that the environment was very bad. That is, the weather was very bad. It was bitter cold, and in that situation the story is taking place. Okay. Hence the line, their dying fire in need of log further established that point. So this particular line in the second stanza, their dying fire in need of log, establishes that the weather was extremely bad and they needed this fire so much because this is the only source of heat which is going to keep them warm and help them survive. But unfortunately this fire was dying out. Why? Because of lack of wood. Characters were all stuck with each other in this cold weather where only source of heat was a dying fire and is in need of logs. So these 6 characters who hated so much each other and they were stuck together by fate in this cold weather, their only source of heat was this dying fire, and this dying fire needed desperately logs of wood. Okay. The first man refused to give his log of wood to save the dying fire from dying, not because he was selfish, but because he would rather struggle than to save a black man sitting around the fire too. Look at the discrimination. From the second stanza, we are introduced with a discrimination based on color. Okay, so we are introduced here, we are showcased here the discrimination based on color. So the first man, who was a white man, he refused to give his log of wood to the dying fire. Why? Not because he was selfish, but because he decided that he would rather struggle than to save a black man who was sitting around the fire too. So his hatred towards this black man, his discrimination and prejudices towards this black man was so severe that he decided to struggle rather than to give his log of wood to save the dying fire and survive. So his hatred was more powerful than his urge to leave. So in this stanza, we are introduced with the first character who is a white man, and he hated the black man who was sitting around the fire, and that is why he refused to give his wood of log to save the dying fire. So here we get to know about the discrimination based on color. So I hope you have understood stanza second. Now let's move on to stanza 3. Here the poet describes another sort of tension prevailing in the story, which is discrimination based on religious difference. So in second stanza, we get to know about the discrimination based on color, and in third stanza, we will get to know about the discrimination based on religious grounds. The next man refused to give his log into the fire because he saw a man sitting around who did not belong to his church, didn't share his religious ideologies. So the next man, he refused to give his log. Why? Because he saw a man was sitting around the fire who did not belong to his church and did not share his ideologies. Means he belonged to different religious ideologies, and that is what triggered the hatred of this man on religious ground, and that is why he refused to give his log of wood to save the dying fire. So here we get to see the discrimination based on religion. I hope you have understood. Now let's move on to stanza 4. So in the stanza 2 and in stanza 3, we get to know about the discrimination based on color and religion. Let's see what we have in stanza 4. In this stanza, the poet introduced the third one, sat in tattered clothes, which meant that the man was poor and so his clothes were torn. So in the fourth stanza, we are introduced with a man who was poor and his clothes were torn. So you just imagine a person whose clothes were torn, how much he would have suffered in that cold weather. He had suffered the most among others in this cold weather because his clothes were torn. Okay, he was a poor man. In spite of his suffering, but in spite of all this suffering, he is suffering the most because his clothes were torn. His clothes were not keeping him warm, so he needed the fire more than others. Okay, still, in spite of this, he refused to give his log to save the dying fire. But in spite of his tremendous suffering in the cold weather, he still refused to give his log of wood to save the fire. Why? Because he didn't want to help the ideal rich. So there was a rich man sitting around the fire, and because this poor man didn't like or hated this rich man ideal, and he referred the rich man to be ideal. Okay, that means someone who doesn't work. Okay, so that is why he decided he would rather suffer in the cold weather than to give his log of wood to save the dying fire. So see the hatred over here. So this is a discrimination based on economic standard of different people. So fourth stanza tells us about the discrimination about economic standard of different people. The poor is hating the rich person because he thinks the rich is idle, and that is why he said he will not sacrifice his log of wood to save the dying fire. Rather, he would suffer himself to teach this rich man a lesson. So see the condition. Now let's move on to stanza 5. The rich man was busy calculating as to how to keep what he earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. So stanza 5 tells us that the rich man was busy calculating. What he was calculating? He was calculating how he is going to protect what he has earned from this lazy, shiftless poor. So to him, this poor was a lazy man, and to the poor, he was an idle rich. So the rich man was not worried about how he is going to survive in this cold water because of the dying fire. Rather, he was thinking how he is going to save his earned possession from this lazy poor. So his hatred has been portrayed in stanza 5, the hatred of the rich man towards the poor. The poet here was referring to the log that he possessed. So here the rich man, he was busy calculating how to keep what he earned. Here what he earned, the poet was referring to the log of wood over here. Okay, so here what he earned doesn't mean the money, it means the log of wood that he had that time, because the log of wood was very important at that juncture of time, because the fire was dying out and it needed desperately wood. But all of this, in spite of possessing wood, they were hesitant to give, or they refused to give the log of wood due to their prejudices and discriminatory nature and hatred towards each other. So this rich man also was thinking about that. And the thing to be noted is that in these two stanzas, in stanza 4 and 5, we have been told about the two rich and poor people who hated each other. Okay, and see the thing, beautiful thing, that the thing to be noted here is that in these two stanzas, both rich and poor had prejudice about the other being lazy and idle. So both, they had their prejudices and discrimination in their mind. The poor thought the rich was idle, and the rich thought the poor was lazy. So in these two stanzas, we get to know about the discrimination and the prejudices that people have on basis of economic standard. So I hope you have understood stanza 5. Now let's move on to stanza 6. This stanza depicts the emotion of hatred and revenge that arises from the discrimination done to poor black man. So over here we are told about a poor black man and the hatred that he possessed in his heart. Why this hatred developed? Because he has been discriminated and he has been tortured. So this stanza depicts the emotion of hatred and revenge that has arisen in the mind of the poor black man because of the discrimination that was done to him. So this poor black man had his mind full of hatred and revenge towards white men. Why? Because this white man has done a lot of torture on them, discriminating them on their color. Okay. This strong emotion of revenge turned the poor black man into abuser. So this revenge was so strong, the hatred towards the white man was so strong that the poor man turned into an abuser, and he chose to suffer than to help the white man. So he decided he would suffer himself. He will die in this cold weather, but he will not give his log of wood to keep the fire burning, because there was a white man sitting around the fire, and he would do everything to take revenge from the white man. And he took this as an opportunity to take revenge from the white man, that he will not help the white man survive. So he saw this as an opportunity to spite the white rather than to save his life. So this was an opportunity for him to take revenge from the white men, and that is why he refused to give his log of wood to save the dying fire. So stanza 6, the hatred and revenge mentality that this poor black man possessed in his heart because of the constant discrimination and torture done on him by the white men, and that is why he took this opportunity to take revenge, and he refused to give his log of wood to help keep the fire burning. Now let's move on to stanza 7. This is the second last stanza of the poem, and this introduced the last man of the group who, as the line said, did not expect for gain. So in the second last stanza of the poem, we are introduced with a man, and how we are introduced to the man? By this line, did not expect for gain, means this particular line tells us that this man was a businessman, because he would do nothing if he doesn't find any benefit out of it. So did not accept for gain suggested was a businessman. So this line, that he would not do anything unless in return of benefit or a gain, it suggests that this particular man, this last man of the group, was a businessman. And as you all know, the businessmen are of this time, that they will only invest something if he finds he will get gain in return. As such, he would not spend his resource without any gain in return. So that is why he decided that if he doesn't have any gain in return, he will not invest his resource. And what was his resource? Log of wood. Here in these circumstances, log of wood was his resource and he would not utilize it unless and until he is confident about a gain in return. Was how he played the game. This line is very important in the poem. How he played the game. What does this line signify? It suggests that each individual took the only chance to survive as a game to defeat their enemies at the cost of their lives. So this is so important line in the poem, which it has a very important message going out, that each individual, that means each of these 6 men were so much in hatred with each other, had so much prejudices and discriminatory nature filled mind, that they took this chance to take revenge and defeat their enemies instead of trying to save their lives. They could have easily sacrificed or give their log of wood to save the dying fire and could save each other from dying in this cold, extremely cold weather, but they didn't do it. They all refused to give their log of wood to keep the fire burning. Why? Because they took this thing as an opportunity to teach their enemies lesson, to defeat their enemies. So their life was not as valuable to them as their mentality or hatred towards their enemies were. Their prejudices and their discrimination on basis of caste, creed, religion, color and ethnicity were more stronger than their urge to live or survive. They preferred suffering than to help each other. So I hope you have understood stanza 2nd. This is the second last stanza. In the last stanza, that is the stanza 8, this brings a conclusion to the whole story. Obviously, this is the last stanza, so it will bring a conclusion to the entire story. The concluding stanza of this poem highlighted the moral value of the whole story. So here we get to know about the moral value of the story. That is, what after reading the poem, what message as readers we get. That has been highlighted in this particular last stanza and stated the consequences brought by the action of these characters. Now see, this poem is actually a protest against this discrimination done on basis of caste, creed, religion, color and ethnicity. The poet has given a strong and a true message to the society that people should change their mentality. They should get themselves out from these prejudices and discriminatory mind setup in order to progress. Because if we keep fighting with each other and hate each other on basis of this caste, color, creed and gender and all this, then we will never progress in life. And that has been highlighted in this poem. In this poem we see the coldness of heart. This is that is why the title of the poem is so apt, the cold. That is, the coldness in heart of each of these 6 men were the reason behind their suffering, their downfall. Okay, if they would have been more friendlier with each other, they could have saved each other's lives. But their hatred, their prejudices, their discrimination was so strong that they preferred dying than to help each other with the log of wood and keep the fire burning. Okay. So their action, their prejudices were dominating their actions and deeds, and they had to suffer the consequences of their actions. Okay, so this is the moral of this poem, The Cold Within, that the coldness in heart of each of these 6 men were actually the it actually brought the downfall of them. They could have easily helped each other and survived in this cold, extremely cold weather, but they preferred suffering than to help each other. They took this situation as an opportunity to defeat each other, defeat their enemies, rather than to help each other and survive. So this particular poem is actually showing us the how dangerous this discriminatory nature of human beings are. The prejudices that are filled in our mind should be eradicated in order to in order to make this world a better place to live in. So this particular last stanza of the poem is actually highlighting the moral value of the whole story. We get to know about that the consequences of this consequences that was brought by the action of these characters. So had they helped each other in this weather, they could have survived easily, but they preferred not helping each other and they preferred suffering. Their hatred was so strong towards each other that they preferred suffering than to help each other. And this is a condition which exists in today's world as well. Even in today our society practices such prejudices and such discriminations, where people are differentiated on basis of caste, creed, gender, religion, color and ethnicity. But this needs to be stopped. James Patrick Kinney has given a very strong and loud message, which is harsh at the same time true, that this discriminatory nature of our society is leading us nowhere, and this needs to be eradicated completely if we want to have a prosperous and healthy society. So I hope you have understood this poem. In case you have any doubt, do let me know in the comment section, and keep watching my video. Till then, bye bye, thank you, and please don't forget to share, subscribe and like my channel.